You know that feeling when someone raises their voice just slightly, not even at you, and your whole body goes on high alert. Your chest tight, your thoughts race. You start scanning the room, calculating, preparing, and the worst part, you don't even know why you do it. Nobody yelled at you, nothing bad happened, but something inside you already shifted into survival mode. That's not anxiety. That's not overthinking. That's a nervous system that was trained to expect danger. And if that sounds familiar, this video is for you. Let me tell you about someone. Let's call her Maya. Maya grew up in a home that looked perfectly fine from the outside. Her parents weren't monsters. There were no dramatic scenes, no screaming matches every night, but there was something else, something harder to name. When her dad came home, Maya would listen to the sound of his footsteps before he even opened the door. Light footsteps meant it was okay. Heavy ones meant she needed to disappear. When her mom went quiet, Maya would spend the next hour running through everything she'd said that day, trying to figure out what she did wrong. She learned to read moods the way other kids learn to read books. She became an expert at it. She knew when to be funny to break tension. She knew when to shrink herself. She knew when to be extra helpful, extra good, extra quiet, and she never, not once, let herself take up too much space. Maya grew up. She moved out. She built a life. But here's the thing about nervous systems. They don't know that the danger is gone. There's a concept in psychology called hypervigilance. And it sounds clinical, but what it actually means is this: your brain gets so used to scanning for threats that it never really turns off. It becomes your default setting. For children raised in emotionally unpredictable homes, homes where love felt conditional, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where silence was more terrifying than shouting, the brain learns one very important lesson. Safety is not a given. You have to earn it. Constantly. And that lesson doesn't just live in your memories, it lives in your body, in your reflexes, in the way your stomach drops when someone's tone changes, in the way you over-apologize, in the way you can't relax even when everything is technically fine. This is what it means to have grown up walking on eggshells. Now pause for a second, think about your own life. Do you find yourself reading the energy in every room you walk into? Do you feel responsible for other people's emotions, like it's somehow your job to manage how they feel? Do you apologize for things that aren't your fault? Do you shrink when someone seems even slightly annoyed? If even one of those hit close to home, keep watching, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. Here's the psychological truth that nobody talks about enough. When you grow up in a home where you're constantly monitoring someone else's emotional state, a parent who was volatile, depressed, explosive, unpredictable, or just emotionally absent, you don't just learn to be careful. You rewire. Your brain literally reorganizes itself around the task of threat detection. The part of your brain responsible for survival, the amygdala, stays perpetually switched on. And the part responsible for reason, for calm, for knowing I am safe right now, has a much harder time doing its job. So you become someone who is always bracing, always anticipating, always one step ahead of the next emotional storm, even when the storm stopped years ago. And because you learned that other people's moods were your responsibility to manage, you grew up without a very important thing. You never learned to just be, without performing, without people-pleasing, without shrinking. Let me give you a few real-life patterns that show up in adults who grew up this way, and I want you to sit with these because they might explain a lot about yourself. The first one is called fawning. When conflict arises, you don't fight, you don't flee. You immediately try to appease, you over-explain, you agree even when you don't want to. You make yourself as easy and likable and non-threatening as possible, because somewhere deep down you learned that being agreeable kept you safe. The second is emotional masking. You are so good at reading other people's emotions that you often can't identify your own. Someone asks you how you feel and you give them a reasonable, socially acceptable answer. But the real answer, you genuinely don't know. You were so busy monitoring everyone else's feelings that you never learned the language of your own. The third is anticipatory anxiety. You're not just anxious about what's happening, you're anxious about what might happen. You run through worst-case scenarios not because you're pessimistic, but because preparation always felt like protection. If you saw the bad thing coming, at least you weren't blindsided. Does any of this feel uncomfortably familiar? Here's the moment I want you to really sit with. You did not develop these patterns because something was wrong with you. You developed them because they worked. When you were a child, hypervigilance kept you out of harm's way. Reading moods kept you emotionally safe. Shrinking yourself meant fewer explosions. People-pleasing meant a little more warmth on the coldest days. These were not weaknesses. These were brilliant survival strategies created by a child who was doing the absolute best they could. The tragedy is not that you developed them. The tragedy is that you kept using them long after you left the house that made them necessary. Because here's the twist. The very skills that protected you as a child, the ones that made you perceptive, adaptable, sensitive, selfless, those same skills became the chains that held you back as an adult. Your sensitivity became anxiety. Your adaptability became losing yourself in relationships. Your selflessness became resentment. Your perceptiveness became exhaustion. You built armor for a war that ended, and you've been wearing it ever since. Pause again, and this time I want you to be honest with yourself. How much energy do you spend managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own? Not occasionally, not sometimes, but as a default way of moving through the world. Because here's what nobody told you when you were growing up in that house. Their moods were never your fault. Their unhappiness was never your responsibility. Their volatility was never something you had the power to fix. You were a child. And children should not be emotional caretakers for the adults in their lives. But you were. And you became so good at it that you still are with your boss, your partner, your friends, strangers on the internet. You are still the child in that house, reading footsteps, calculating risks, making yourself smaller so that someone else can feel bigger. So what do you do with all of this? The first thing, and this is more important than any technique or strategy I could give you, is simply to name it. To acknowledge that what you experienced was real. That the hypervigilance, the fawning, the emotional numbness, the constant bracing, these are not personality flaws. They are responses to an environment that was not emotionally safe. And naming that is not about blame. It is not about making your parents the villain in your story. It is simply about telling the truth, because you cannot heal what you refuse to see. The second thing is to practice the most radical act available to you, allowing yourself to feel safe when you actually are. This sounds impossibly simple, but for someone with a hypervigilant nervous system, it is one of the hardest things there is. It means sitting in a quiet moment without filling it with dread. It means letting someone be slightly annoyed without immediately catastrophizing. It means letting your guard down even just a little and tolerating the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing what comes next. And the third thing, perhaps the most important, is to grieve the childhood you deserved but didn't have. Not to dramatize it, not to spiral in it, but to genuinely, quietly acknowledge that a little child inside you worked very hard to hold everything together. And that child deserved to just be a child. Silly, careless, allowed to take up space. That grief is not weakness. That grief is the beginning of something finally becoming whole. Here's where I want to leave you. The adults who grew up walking on eggshells often become the most compassionate, perceptive, emotionally intelligent people in the room. They are the ones who notice when someone is hurting before that person says a word. They are the ones who hold space for complexity. They are the ones who have survived things that never made the headlines because they happened quietly, behind closed doors, in the language of moods and silences and careful footsteps. If that's you, you are not broken. You are someone who learned to carry a very heavy thing for a very long time. And you are allowed to put it down now, not all at once, maybe just one small piece today, but you are allowed.